The emergency alarm screamed through the Galactic Council chambers for the third time that week. Ambassador Thyrene pressed her scaled hands against the cold metal table and tried to steady her breathing. Around her, representatives from 40 different species sat in various states of panic. The holographic display at the center of the room showed the same terrible image they had been watching for months now. Red dots spreading across the star map like a disease. The Devourers were coming. 17 systems gone in the last month, Council Chairman Vex announced, his voice hollow. They consume everything. Planets, stations, ships. Nothing stops them. Our fleets might as well be throwing rocks. Thyrene had seen the reports. Entire civilizations reduced to empty husks of worlds, stripped of all biological matter. The Devourers moved like locusts through space, and they were heading straight for the heart of Council territory. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the Council had no answer. We need to consider alternatives, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what alternative she meant, the one they had all been avoiding. Chairman Vex's 6 eyes focused on her. You cannot be serious, Thyrene. After everything we learned? After what they did? After what they did to save us, Thyrene corrected. She pulled up the historical files, watching as 4,000-year-old images filled the display. Humans. The word itself still made some species flinch. The records showed the war that had nearly destroyed the Council. The Krathic swarm had come without warning, overwhelming defenses that had stood for 10,000 years. World after world fell. Then the humans arrived. Nobody had expected much from the newcomers with their single homeworld and primitive ships. They were so very wrong. Thyrene watched the old footage play out. Human vessels, smaller than Council dreadnoughts but faster, deadlier. They fought with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. When a human ship was crippled, the crew would ram it into enemy formations. When human soldiers were surrounded, they detonated their own positions to take the enemy with them. They learned from every battle, adapted to every tactic, and they never, ever stopped coming. They saved us, a young Quellan representative whispered, watching the display. They terrified us, Chairman Vex corrected. Look at what happened after the Krathics fell. The footage changed. Human forces pursuing the remnants of the swarm across 3 sectors. No mercy, no prisoners. They hunted down every last Krathic ship, every last colony, every last egg cluster. The Krathics had nearly driven the Council to extinction. Humans made sure the Krathics went completely extinct instead. The Council had celebrated it first. Then they understood what they had unleashed. Humans did not just win wars. They ended them permanently. Several species began to ask uncomfortable questions. If humans could do that to the Krathics, what would stop them from doing it to anyone else? The treaty was for everyone's protection, Chairman Vex said. Including theirs, Thyrene nodded. She remembered studying the treaty terms. Humanity would withdraw to their own space. No contact, no expansion. The Council would leave them alone, and humans would leave the galaxy alone. Both sides had agreed readily. The Council feared what humans might become if they kept fighting. Humans, looking at what they had done, feared the same thing. 4,000 years of silence followed. They kept their word, Thyrene said. For 4 millennia, not a single human ship has crossed the border. No messages, no contact. They simply disappeared, which means we have no idea what they have become, Vex replied. 4,000 years of development in isolation. They could have technologies we cannot imagine. They could have grown even more dangerous. Or more peaceful, Thyrene countered. We assume they spent those years building weapons. What if they spent them building something else? The debate raged for hours. Some representatives argued that humanity might not even exist anymore. Others feared that humanity had evolved into something worse. A few, like Thyrene, held on to hope that the species who had saved them once might do so again. Finally, a vote was called. The Council chamber fell silent as results came in. By the narrowest margin in Council history, the decision was made. They would break the ancient treaty. They would call for help from the species that still haunted their nightmares. Thyrene volunteered to compose the message. She spent days drafting it, rewriting it, trying to find words that would convey their desperation without sounding like a threat or a demand. Finally, she settled on something simple. To humanity, the Galactic Council faces extinction. We broke our promise to leave you alone because we have nowhere else to turn. We do not demand your help. We do not expect it. But we ask, please, we need you. She attached the coordinates of the nearest besieged system and the current devourer movements. Then, hands shaking, she sent the message across 4,000 years of silence. For 3 days, nothing happened. Some council members began to relax, assuming humans were gone or unwilling to respond. Thyrene sat by the communications console, waiting. On the 4th day, the response came. It was brief. Just a few words in perfect council standard language, as if humans had been listening the entire time. "We've been waiting. Coordinates received. We're coming." Thyrene read the message again and again. "We've been waiting." That phrase sent chills through her scales. Waiting for what? For 4,000 years? Had humans been watching the galaxy this entire time? Had they known this day would come? The council erupted into chaos again. Some called for a retraction of the message. Others began evacuating core worlds. Chairman Vex simply stared at the display with an expression Thyrene could not read. "What have we done?" someone whispered. Thyrene did not answer. She looked at the star map, at the red dots of the devourers spreading across council space, and at the single blue dot now moving from the restricted zone. Moving fast. Moving toward them. She honestly did not know if they had just saved the galaxy or doomed it. In 7 days, they would find out. The humans were coming home. The waiting was the worst part. Thyrene stood on the bridge of the council flagship Eternal Harmony, watching the edge of the Vexor system where human ships would emerge. If they emerged, around her, dozens of council vessels held position in nervous formation. Every species had sent representatives. Everyone wanted to see what humanity had become. "Sensors detecting spatial distortion," the Quellan officer announced. His voice cracked slightly. "They're here." The first ship appeared like a ghost stepping from shadow into light. It was huge, easily twice the size of the Eternal Harmony, and shaped like nothing Thyrene had ever seen. Smooth curves of dark metal that seemed to drink in the light of nearby stars. Then another ship appeared. And another. Within minutes, 30 human vessels surrounded the council fleet. Thyrene's breath caught in her throat. The old human ships had been crude, functional. These were works of art and terror combined. They moved with fluid grace, and every sensor reading showed power levels that should not be possible. "Incoming transmission," communications reported. A human face appeared on the main display. Female with dark skin and bright eyes that held both warmth and calculation, she wore a simple gray uniform with minimal decoration. "Council vessels, this is Captain Elena Rourke of the UHSV Defiant. We received your call. We're here to help." Her voice was calm, friendly even. It made the situation somehow more surreal. Chairman Vex stepped forward, trying to maintain composure. "Captain Rourke, I am Chairman Vex of the Galactic Council. We appreciate your response to our distress call. The situation is dire. The Devourers have already consumed 17 systems and are advancing on core territory." "We know," Captain Rourke said simply. "We've been tracking them for the past 2 years. Nasty species. No communication capability we can detect, pure consumption drive, incredibly adaptive biology. They're about 6 days from hitting your most populated sector." Silence filled the council bridge. Finally, Thyrene spoke up. "You've been tracking them?" "For 2 years." Captain Rourke's expression softened slightly. "Ambassador Thyrene, correct? I read your file. Your message was beautifully written but unnecessary. We've been monitoring council space since the day we signed the treaty. We don't intrude, don't interfere, but we watch. When the Devourers appeared, we began preparations immediately. Then why wait?" Chairman Vex demanded. "Why let 17 systems fall?" The captain's eyes went hard. "Because we gave our word. We promised not to cross the border without permission. We don't break our promises, Chairman, even when it costs lives, even when waiting is agony. You had to ask. Now you have, and we're here." Something in her tone made Thyrene understand. Humans had been ready to help all along, but they had restrained themselves. They had watched systems burn because they refused to break the treaty. That kind of discipline, that level of self-control was not what she had expected. "What do you need from us?" Vex asked. "Right now?"
"Get your civilian populations moving."
"We're transmitting evacuation protocols to all council vessels. We've already dispatched 30 colony ships to begin taking refugees. Medical facilities, food, housing, all prepared. Get your people out of the danger zones." The efficiency was staggering. Within hours, human vessels were coordinating with council ships across a dozen systems. Refugee convoys formed up with human escorts. Thyrene watched from the Eternal Harmony as Captain Rourke managed operations with cool precision. directing thousands of ships like pieces on a game board. She decided to visit one of the human vessels directly. Captain Rourke agreed immediately and sent a shuttle. The interior of the human ship was surprisingly comfortable. Clean white corridors, soft lighting, and crew members who nodded politely as she passed. She saw humans working alongside sophisticated AI systems, their movements practiced and efficient. Captain Rourke met her in a spacious briefing room. "Ambassador, can I offer you anything? We have a fairly comprehensive database of Council species dietary requirements." "No, thank you. I wanted to see for myself, to understand what humanity has become." Rourke smiled sadly. "What we've always been, Ambassador, just better at controlling it." Before Thyrene could respond, alarms blared. "Captain, we have multiple Devourer vessels attacking Evacuation Convoy 7 Delta. 15 Council ships and 40,000 refugees." Rourke's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly captain vanished, replaced by something that reminded Thyrene why humanity had terrified the galaxy. "Dispatch 4th Strike Wing. Rules of engagement, maximum force. Nothing gets through to those transports, nothing." "Acknowledged. 4th Wing engaging." Thyrene watched the tactical display as 6 human fighters intercepted 30 Devourer ships. What happened next would haunt her dreams. The human vessels moved like nothing she had ever seen, dancing through Devourer formations with impossible precision. Their weapons tore through enemy hulls with brutal efficiency. In less than 4 minutes, 30 Devourer ships were reduced to debris. The human fighters didn't have a scratch. "All refugee ships secure," the tactical officer reported. "0 casualties." Captain Rourke's expression softened again. "Good. Have medical teams standing by when the convoy reaches safe harbor. Some of those refugees will be traumatized." The duality struck Thyrene like a physical blow. One moment, Rourke was ordering violence that bordered on savage. The next, she was ensuring traumatized refugees received therapy. It was not what the ancient records had shown. The humans of 4,000 years ago had been warriors consumed by war. These humans were warriors who had learned to turn it on and off. "You said you've been watching us," Thyrene ventured. "For 4,000 years, why?" Rourke stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Because we made a promise to ourselves, Ambassador. After the Krathix War, we looked at what we'd become and we were horrified. We'd killed an entire species, celebrated it. Some of our people wanted to keep going, to conquest, to empire. We were drunk on victory and it scared us." She turned back to face Thyrene. "So we left. We went home, and we spent 4,000 years learning to be better. We studied philosophy, ethics, psychology. We built a civilization dedicated to understanding violence rather than glorifying it. We developed technologies not just for war, but for healing, building, protecting." "But you still built weapons," Thyrene observed. "Incredible weapons. Of course we did. We're not naive. We know the universe is dangerous. We know monsters exist." Rourke's eyes were distant. "We just decided that if we had to be dangerous, we'd be dangerous in defense of those who couldn't defend themselves. We'd be the thing that monsters should fear. And you've been waiting," Thyrene said slowly, understanding dawning. "Waiting for the day you'd be needed instead of feared." Captain Rourke nodded. "We've been waiting for someone to ask us to be their shield instead of their nightmare." "Thank you for that, Ambassador. You have no idea what it means to us." Over the next days, Thyrene watched human forces coordinate the largest evacuation in galactic history. Millions of refugees moved to safety under human protection. And wherever Devourers appeared, human ships were there to meet them with overwhelming force. But what struck Thyrene most was seeing human soldiers in the refugee camps. Warriors in full armor kneeling beside frightened alien children, offering comfort in dozens of languages. Medics working 18-hour shifts to treat injuries. Engineers rebuilding damaged transports. Humanity had not stopped being dangerous. They had learned when to be dangerous and when to be kind. Watching them work, Thyrene began to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had called the right species after all. Thyrene stood in the war room aboard the human vessel Defiant, surrounded by officers from a dozen council species. Captain Rourke was briefing them on the next phase of operations, and the contrast between the council officers and their human counterparts was striking. The council representatives looked exhausted, frightened. The humans looked focused, almost relaxed. They had been fighting the Devourers for 3 weeks now, and they seemed completely at home with it. "The Devourers are adapting faster than we expected," Rourke explained, gesturing at the tactical display. "They've started using new attack patterns. More sophisticated, They're learning from every engagement, a Velkosian admiral named Cross spoke up. How can you be so calm about that? Every species they encounter makes them stronger. Rourke smiled slightly. Admiral, they're not the first enemy to adapt. The trick is to adapt faster. She pulled up new data. We've analyzed their biological structure. They're impressive, but they have weaknesses. We're already developing countermeasures. Thyrene had requested permission to embed herself with human forces, wanting to understand them better. Chairman Vex had approved, though reluctantly. Now she was seeing things that both impressed and disturbed her. The briefing ended, and Thyrene followed a group of human soldiers to their barracks. She needed to understand what made them different. Sergeant Marcus Chen, a stocky man with gray hair and kind eyes, had agreed to talk with her. You want to know about the silence? Chen said, sitting across from her in the small recreation area. Around them, other soldiers played games, read, talked quietly, normal activities. The 4,000 years? Yes. Your people withdrew completely. Why? Chen was quiet for a long moment. Do you know what happened to us after the Krathix War, Ambassador? The real story? Thyrene shook her head. We won. Completely. Totally. We destroyed an entire species and we were good at it. Too good. When the last Krathix died, our government threw celebrations, parades, victory speeches, and then about a month later it all fell apart. He pulled up a holographic image. Old Earth, cities full of humans. The soldiers came home. Millions of them. They'd seen things, done things. The nightmares started. The guilt. We'd killed not just soldiers, but civilians, children, entire planets. Sure, the Krathix would have done the same to us, but that didn't make it easier to live with. Post-traumatic stress, Thyrene said quietly. On a species-wide scale, suicide rates exploded. Violence increased. Veterans couldn't adjust to peace because peace felt fake after what we'd experienced. And the civilians who hadn't fought? Some of them wanted more war. They'd seen what we could do, felt the power of victory, and they wanted to expand, conquer, build an empire. Chen's expression was haunted. We were tearing ourselves apart. The galaxy feared we'd attack them, but the truth was we were attacking ourselves. Then President Morrison gave her famous speech. You probably never heard it. He played an old recording. A human woman standing at a podium, her face lined with exhaustion and grief. Her voice was steady but carried immense pain. We have proven ourselves capable of terrible things. We won a war by becoming more terrible than our enemy. Today I am proud of our courage, proud of our sacrifice, proud of our survival. But I am not proud of what we became to achieve it. We need to leave. Not because the galaxy demands it, though they do. Not because we fear other species, though perhaps we should. We need to leave because we fear ourselves. We need time to heal, to learn, to become a people who can wield power without being consumed by it. This is not exile. This is rehabilitation. The recording ended. Chen looked at Thyrene. We spent the next 4,000 years keeping that promise. We built a whole civilization around one question. How do we stay human? How do we keep our capacity for protection without losing ourselves to our capacity for destruction? Before Thyrene could respond, alarm sounded. Another devourer attack, this time on a council colony that had refused to evacuate. Captain Rourke's voice echoed through the ship. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Thyrene rushed to the observation deck where she could watch the engagement. What she saw there would change her understanding of humanity forever. The Devourer fleet was massive, nearly 100 ships descending on the colony world. The human fleet was smaller, just 20 vessels. Thyrene watched as Captain Rourke made her calculations. We can't save everyone, Rourke said quietly. Her words carried over the open comm. Tactical, how many can we evacuate before they reach the surface? Maybe 30%, Captain. If we fight, we can buy more time, but we'll take heavy casualties. The Devourers have 40 ships in reserve. They're learning to bait us. Rourke was silent for exactly 5 seconds. Then her voice came through hard as steel. We fight. All ships engage. Protect those transports. Whatever it takes, what followed was brutal. Human ships threw themselves at the Devourer fleet with calculated ferocity. Thyrene watched as the UHSV Resolute, badly damaged, rammed itself into a cluster of enemy vessels to clear a path for evacuation shuttles. She saw fighters pilot their craft into Devourer formations even as their ships were falling apart around them. The humans were dying, for people they'd never met, for a species that had feared them, and they were doing it without hesitation. 70% evacuated, Tactical reported. 80%, 90. Get them all out, Rourke commanded. Her ship was taking fire, shields failing, but she held position. Nobody gets left behind. 100% evacuation complete. All civilians are safe, Captain. All ships fall back, now. The human fleet withdrew in perfect formation, covering each other's retreat. They'd lost 4 ships. Nearly 1,000 humans had died, but every civilian from the colony was safe. Later, Thyrene found Captain Rourke in her quarters. The captain sat at her desk, staring at a list of names. The dead. You didn't have to do that, Thyrene said quietly. You could have evacuated fewer people and taken fewer losses. Rourke looked up. Her eyes were red. Yes, we could have. That would have been the smart military decision. But we didn't spend 4,000 years learning to be smart, Ambassador. We learned to be right. Those people needed us. We don't abandon people who need us. Even when it costs you? Especially then. That's the whole point. Rourke stood and walked to her viewport. After we left the galaxy, we studied every war we'd ever fought. Every victory, every loss. We realized something. The wars we're proudest of aren't the ones we won. They're the ones we fought for something bigger than ourselves. She turned to face Thyrene. We're not heroes, Ambassador. We're just people who decided that if we had to be dangerous, we'd be dangerous in the right way. We know what monsters look like because we've been monsters. That means we know how to fight them. More importantly, we know how not to become them again. Thyrene understood then. Humanity hadn't spent 4,000 years becoming peaceful. They'd spent it learning to channel their nature toward protection instead of destruction. They were still killers. They'd just chosen who they would kill and why. You scare me, Thyrene admitted. But I think I'm beginning to understand why I should be grateful for that. Rourke smiled sadly. Good, because the Devourers are about to learn what happens when humans stop holding back. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the most tense Thyrene had ever attended. Captain Rourke stood at the center of the chamber, projecting calm confidence while 40 species stared at her with mixed expressions of hope and fear. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed the Devourer territory, a red stain spreading across the galactic map. You want to attack their home territory, Chairman Vex said flatly. You want us to approve an offensive operation into the heart of their space. Not want, Chairman, need. Rourke expanded the display. We've been fighting defensively for 6 weeks. We've saved hundreds of systems, evacuated billions of civilians, but the Devourers keep coming. For every ship we destroy, 3 more emerge from their breeding grounds. We're fighting a war of attrition we cannot win. A Quellan representative stood. You've studied them. You said they're adaptive. How do we know an attack won't just make them stronger? Because we've identified their weakness, Rourke replied. She pulled up biological data. Devourers have a hive structure, but it's more complex than we thought. They have what we're calling core queens, massive organisms that coordinate entire sectors. Kill a core queen, and every devourer in her network goes dormant for approximately 72 hours, long enough to eliminate them. How many core queens? Thyrene asked. We've identified 5, all deep in their territory, all heavily defended. Rourke's expression was grim. This won't be easy. We'll take significant casualties, but it will end the threat permanently. The debate raged for hours. Some council members wanted to continue defensive operations. Others suggested negotiation, though every attempt to communicate with Devourers had failed. A few radical voices suggested abandoning the core territories entirely and rebuilding elsewhere. Finally, Thyrene spoke up. What will this attack reveal about your capabilities? Your true capabilities? Rourke met her eyes. Everything, Ambassador. We'll have to use technologies we've kept hidden, weapons we hope never to deploy, tactics that will make some of you question whether you should fear us more than you fear the Devourers. The silence that followed was deafening. But you'll do it anyway, Vex said quietly. If you give permission, we won't cross that line without your approval. You asked us to help, not to conquer. We need your consent for this. It took 2 more hours of debate before the vote was called. The result was closer than Thyrene expected, but it passed. Humanity was authorized to take the offensive. What followed was the largest military operation in galactic history. Every human vessel was mobilized. 50 major warships, hundreds of support craft, and thousands of fighters assembled at the edge of Devourer space. The human fleet had grown, reinforcements arriving from Earth itself. Thyrene realized that humanity had only sent a fraction of their forces initially. Now she was seeing their true strength. Thyrene had embedded herself with the flagship Defiant again. She watched as Captain Rourke coordinated with 4 other fleet commanders, each tasked with destroying a core queen. The 5th would be Rourke's target. "We go in hard and fast," Rourke explained during the final briefing. "No retreat, no hesitation. The Devourers will throw everything at us. We have to push through, reach the queens, and complete our objectives before they adapt to our tactics." "What if we fail?" asked Commander Park, a young human officer. "Then we make sure our failure costs them dearly enough that Council forces can finish the job," Rourke replied simply. "This ends today one way or another." The fleet jumped into Devourer space and hell followed with them. Thyrene had seen the humans fight before, but this was different. They weren't holding back anymore. She watched as human ships deployed weapons that bent space itself, creating gravity wells that crushed Devourer vessels. Fighters used quantum missiles that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, hitting targets from impossible angles. Capital ships fired beams that didn't just damage enemy vessels but unraveled their molecular structure. "What is that?" Thyrene gasped as a human destroyer released a cloud of silver particles that engulfed a Devourer formation. The enemy ship simply stopped, frozen in place. "Nano-disablers," the tactical officer explained. "They interrupt biological electrical signals. We developed them for medical purposes originally. Turns out they work on hostile organisms too. But the Devourers were not defenseless. They swarmed the human fleet with terrifying numbers." Thyrene watched human ships take catastrophic damage. The UHSV Valiant exploded, taking its crew of 400 with it. The UHSV Perseverance lost all power and drifted helplessly until a Devourer swarm tore it apart. Through it all, Captain Rourke's voice remained steady on the command channel, directing fleet movements, calling targets, making impossible decisions. "3rd Squadron, cover the medical transports." "Yes, I know it leaves your flank exposed. Do it anyway." 7th Squadron, redirect to assist 4th Fleet. "They're taking heavy fire. Defiant will proceed to the target alone if necessary." Thyrene saw Rourke's hands shake as she gave orders that sent people to their deaths, saw the captain's jaw clench every time a ship went dark on the tactical display. This was not a warrior who loved battle. This was someone who hated what she had to do but did it anyway. "Approaching Core Queen Alpha," the navigator announced. "Heavy defense network ahead." The Devourer Queen was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Defiant. It floated in the center of an asteroid field, surrounded by thousands of defense organisms. Rourke studied the defenses, her mind working through calculations. Tactical, prepare the Omega weapon. Navigation, plot a course straight through their formation. Shields to maximum, all non-essential crew to escape pods. "Captain, the Omega weapon is experimental. If it fails, we ram the Queen and hope the explosion is enough. But it won't fail. Charge the weapon and fire on my mark." The Defiant accelerated, taking fire from every direction. Thyrene felt the ship shudder with each impact. Alarms screamed. Crew members shouted damage reports. Through it all, Rourke stood firm at the center of the bridge. Omega weapon charged. Fire. A beam of pure white light erupted from the Defiant, cutting through the Devourer defenses like they were paper. It struck the Core Queen directly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Queen began to glow from within. Cracks appeared across its surface. It exploded in a silent flash that lit up space for millions of kilometers. Core Queen Alpha destroyed, tactical confirmed, detecting massive disruption in Devourer neural networks. They're going dormant. Similar reports came from the other fleets. One by one, the Core Queens fell. The cost was terrible. Humanity lost 16 capital ships and nearly 10,000 lives. But the mission was complete. As the human fleet regrouped, Thyrene found Captain Rourke in her quarters. The captain sat in the dark, staring at the list of casualties. Tears ran silently down her face. "We won," Thyrene said quietly. "We survived," Rourke corrected. 10,000 people didn't. 10,000 families will get messages saying their loved ones died defending species they'd never met. "How is that winning?" "Because 20 billion council citizens are alive because of those 10,000, Thyrene replied. She sat beside the captain. "You made impossible choices today. Sent people to die. Used weapons that terrify me. And you did it to protect others. That's what makes you different from the humans of 4,000 years ago." Rourke looked at her. "How?" "Because you hate what you had to do. The old humans celebrated violence. You mourn it even when necessary. You're not warriors who learned peace. You're protectors who understand the cost of protection. Rourke wiped her eyes. I hope that's enough. I hope when this is over, the galaxy doesn't decide we're too dangerous to exist. After today, Thyrene said quietly, I think the galaxy is going to realize you're too valuable to lose. The war was over. 3 months after the Core Queens fell, the last remnants of the Devourer swarms had been eliminated. The galaxy was safe, and now it had to decide what to do about humanity. Thyrene stood in the council chambers, watching representatives debate the question that everyone was afraid to ask directly. What happens now? They saved us, said the Quellan ambassador. We cannot deny that, but we also cannot ignore what we witnessed. The weapons they deployed, the technologies they possess, they could conquer the entire council in a matter of weeks if they chose to. But they haven't chosen to, Thyrene countered. They could have ignored our plea for help. They could have demanded payment or concessions. Instead, they came freely and asked for nothing in return. Chairman Vex stood, his age showing more than ever. Ambassador Thyrene, the council has decided to send a delegation to Earth to see their homeworld. To understand what humanity has truly become, we would like you to lead this delegation. Thyrene felt her heart skip. Earth. The homeworld that had been isolated for 4,000 years. The place where humanity had retreated to master themselves. I would be honored, Chairman. The human government agreed immediately to the visit. Captain Rourke herself volunteered to escort the delegation. Fair warning, she said with a slight smile. Earth might not be what you expect. The council delegation consisted of representatives from 20 species. They traveled aboard a council vessel, escorted by human ships. As they approached Earth's system, Thyrene studied the sensor readings. Dozens of human colonies throughout the system. Massive orbital stations, defense platforms that made her nervous just looking at them. This was clearly a species that could wage war on a galactic scale if they chose. But as they entered Earth's orbit, something unexpected appeared on the sensors. The planet was green, incredibly green. Forests and oceans dominated the landscape. Cities were there, but they blended with nature rather than overwhelming it. We spent our isolation learning balance, Rourke explained as they descended. How to advance without destroying. How to grow without consuming. The old Earth was dying when we left the galaxy. We almost repeated the Devourer's mistakes on our own world. We fixed that first. They landed near what Rourke called the Memorial District. As the delegation disembarked, Thyrene saw a sprawling complex of parks and monuments. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Humans walked among them, many with flowers or leaving small tokens. What is this place? Asked a Velkosian representative. Rourke's expression became solemn. This is why we left. This is what we couldn't forget. She led them to the nearest monument. It was a massive wall covered in names. Millions of names. At the top, text in multiple languages read, The Krathiks, a species we destroyed. May we never forget the cost of victory. Thyrene felt her breath catch. Another monument showed a Krathiks family, captured in perfect detail. Children playing, parents watching, all dead now, killed by human weapons. Every species we've ever fought has a memorial here, Rourke explained quietly. Every soldier, every civilian, every child. We maintain these monuments. We teach our children about them. We make sure no human ever forgets that war has costs that victory cannot erase. They walked through the Memorial District for hours. Thyrene saw humans of all ages paying respects, saw teachers bringing students to learn history, saw veterans, some missing limbs or bearing scars, standing in silence before the names of those they'd killed. This is your culture, Thyrene said slowly, understanding dawning. You built your entire civilization around remembering the cost of violence. Not just remembering, Rourke corrected. Learning from it. Using it to guide our choices. Every human child visits these memorials. Every military officer spends time here before receiving their commission. We never want to forget what we're capable of, or why we should avoid it whenever possible. The delegation visited other sites across Earth, universities dedicated to studying peace and conflict resolution, medical centers that shared their technology freely with other species, art galleries full of works exploring the nature of violence and redemption. This was not a warrior culture that had learned peace. It was a species that had weaponized their guilt and shame, turning it into determination to be better. Finally, they gathered in the Hall of Unity, where the human government convened. President Sarah Kim addressed them directly. members of the Galactic Council, 4,000 years ago. We left your company as broken people. We had won a war and lost ourselves in the process. We needed time to heal, to grow, to become a species worthy of the power we possessed. We want you to know that we consider that mission ongoing. We will never be finished becoming better, but we hope we've proven that we can be trusted with the responsibility you've given us. Chairman Vex stood. President Kim, the Council has debated extensively about humanity's role going forward. Some fear you, some want you to leave again, but the majority recognize that you've demonstrated something we thought impossible. You've shown that a species can be powerful and ethical, dangerous and trustworthy. We have a proposal. He pulled up a document on the holographic display. We would like to create a new treaty, not one of isolation but of integration. However, we recognize that humanity's greatest strength is your understanding of violence. We propose that humanity join the Council not as standard members, but as dedicated protectors. We're calling it the Shield Wall. You would be responsible for defending Council space from external threats, while Council members focus on diplomacy, science, culture, and growth. President Kim was silent for a long moment. You want us to be your military, your weapon? No, Thyrene spoke up. We want you to be our guardians, our protectors, the ones who stand between us and the darkness, not because we command you, but because you choose it, because it's who you've become. Rourke stepped forward. Madam President, if I may speak, the shield wall makes sense. It's what we've been preparing for. It gives us purpose while preventing the temptation toward empire. We protect others, not ourselves. We serve rather than rule. The debate among humans was brief but intense. Some worried about becoming too militarized. Others worried about being used. But the majority agreed. This was why they'd spent 4,000 years preparing. The new treaty was signed 1 week later. Humanity would join the Galactic Council as the shield wall. They would maintain defensive forces along the galactic rim, respond to threats, and train Council forces in defense. In return, they would have full Council membership, access to trade and cultural exchange, and would never again have to watch from the shadows while others suffered. Thyrene watched as human ships took up positions along the borders of Council space. No longer were they hidden in isolation. No longer were they feared as conquerors. They had found their place as guardians. On her last day on Earth, she visited the Memorial District one final time. She found a new monument being constructed. It honored the 10,000 humans who had died fighting the Devourers. But unusually, it also included the names of every Council citizen those humans had died protecting. 20 billion names. It would take decades to complete. Captain Rourke found her there. Quite a project, the captain said softly. Why include our names? Thyrene asked. This is a memorial for your dead. Because they didn't die for nothing. They died for someone. For 20 billion someones. We want to remember not just the cost, but the purpose. The why behind the sacrifice. Thyrene looked at the incomplete monument, at the human workers carefully carving each name. You really have changed. The humans who fought the Krathiks would never have built something like this. No, Rourke agreed. They built monuments to victory. We build monuments to responsibility. That's the difference 4,000 years makes. As Thyrene prepared to leave Earth, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The desperate call for help. The terrifying wait for humanity's response. The shock of seeing what they'd become. The horror and awe of watching them fight. And finally, understanding. Humanity hadn't stopped being dangerous. They'd learned to be dangerous for the right reasons. They hadn't abandoned their capacity for violence. They'd learned to wield it in protection of others. They were still killers. They'd just chosen to kill only monsters. The galaxy had spent 4,000 years wondering what humanity had become in their isolation. Now they knew. Humanity had become exactly what they'd set out to be. Not conquerors, not pacifists, but guardians who understood the cost of protection and paid it anyway. As her ship left Earth orbit, Thyrene recorded a final note in her official report. For 4,000 years, we feared the silence. We wondered if humanity still existed, and if they did, what they'd become. We worried they'd evolved into something worse. But the truth is far more remarkable. They evolved into something better. Not perfect, not peaceful, but purposeful. They learned to master themselves so they could protect others. The galaxy asked for help, and humanity answered. Not with conquest, but with sacrifice. Not with dominion, but with service. We called, and the killer humans came, not to destroy us, but to protect us, and for that we will be forever grateful. The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind, but humanity would never again be isolated. They'd found their place in the galaxy at last. Standing watch, waiting patiently, ready to face whatever darkness emerged from the void between stars. The shield wall had been raised, and the galaxy could sleep safely behind it.